Well, good morning, everybody, and lovely to be on with you this morning and to hear some of those amazing speakers that presented earlier on. So, what I wanted to do was really just explore some of the trends and some of the conversations that we've been having with our client base and our customers around this productivity surge that we're seeing right now, and whether it lasts or whether it is set in to maintain over the next while. So, obviously, we've just heard some really rich insights from our friends in NVIDIA and LVMH around the acceleration of digital. And I don't think that's of any surprise to anybody. I think a lot of the organizations that we are working closely with right now are really trying to optimize digital and digitalizing how they work. And some are genuinely transforming and really pivoting their business model. And that's really coming through in some of the areas that we're seeing around workplace transformation right now. What it's also having a direct impact on is around employee sentiment. So we're seeing that those customers and those workplaces that are really driving kind of flexible remote working models are really driving much greater trends in terms of employee sentiment and connection. And so there's some stats here just to demonstrate and highlight that to you really around the points, essentially saying that workplaces that offer a more remote working experience for the longer term are seeing a much greater loyalty coming through from employees. And actually, surprisingly enough, we've seen some stats from our colleagues in the US to say that workplaces that are not putting in remote working practices for the longer term now are going to see a shift over the next while. So 1 in 3 are going to say that they're going to change jobs when we move into a recovery stage if they don't provide remote working models over the longer term. So a real shift right now in terms of remote working, a real change in remote working practices. From a Dell Technologies perspective, we've always had remote working. And at the very start of this difficult period with the pandemic, Michael Dell actually sent a letter or a note to all employees and the full leadership team, really encouraging them to take the opportunity to be flexible and work in a very flexible way, and encouraging us to blend work and home and to work around our home lives as well. So that kind of set the bar for us as an organization to try and really reshape our working model and our daily work routine. So exploring this a little bit further, there are some trade-offs that we are seeing, certainly because we are providing technology from both the infrastructure right through to the software across large and small organizations, public and private globally. We are seeing significant trade-offs being made. So although there's a bit of a hopeful suggestion around this is a positive move about flexibility, about agility, it's not always the plus sign. There are a lot of people that are losing out on this, and we are seeing a lot of gaps in terms of a digital divide. So obviously on the positives, much greater sense of productivity, of flexibility that we've touched on. We're also seeing a greater appreciation for people that are carers, and doors are opening up for those that haven't had a light on them before, that are juggling many things in their home lives. And so we're having that much greater appreciation for how people can shape their work around their private lives. I think the other element to notice on this is there are gaps around the technology. And so people are struggling in terms of finding the right kind of space. And so you can see not everybody has the right setup at home. People are working in very confined spaces. People shifted overnight. We worked with many, many organizations that shifted literally within 2 days. They shifted their workforce to work remotely. And many of them weren't set up for that. They didn't have the right workplace setting at home. And so now they're looking to try and really address that in the longer term. So how do we continue to drive this productivity surge, but also set up for the longer term? So home office setups, remote working in whatever way it can be, shared office setups as well, so that people don't have to do that commute. So lots of shifts and changes. I think many of the speakers have touched on this morning already. Technology is not the panacea. It certainly provides a foundation for success. And we are seeing that coming through time and time again in terms of how we've shifted with the use of collaboration tools, the rise of new models, whether it's med tech or pharma tech, even the rise of grocery shopping online, very simple models that have been digitalized overnight. And this has led to greater levels of innovation and creativity coming through. But with that, we've also seen some real challenges, particularly over the last 2 months, around technology not always working. That it does let us down at times. There is a divide. There are challenges with it. And the other big element of this is we're all talking to individuals on these discussion points with Wired that are either tech savvy or business savvy. But there's 1.9 million households across the UK today that do not have access to the internet and do not have access to pay-as-you-go services in a reliable way. And so this really presents a divide that's coming through. And it's not just a small divide, this is a significant one that we're seeing right across the board. Not everybody has access to the right number of devices or the right devices to homeschool children. And so there are some real inequalities rising through this at the moment. So how do we continue to drive that, and how do we really try and ensure that things will move forward in a way that's sustainable and is strong for everybody to make sure that the future is progressive and unequal and fair? So I think one of the big areas that we're seeing is a rise in terms of how we drive new work practices. Certainly we're seeing, even with this digital divide, there's a rise in IoT devices. So there's an irony here that actually we're expanding out the amount of sensors that we may have in our home, and yet so many families across the UK do not have access to the basic devices to homeschool children and to run their businesses. So we are seeing with this rise in terms of IoT and sensors, actually it presents further challenges in terms of greater levels of risk. And that is a huge concern for many businesses. And one of the big stats there that we've got on the screen is, we are seeing an absolute surge in phishing attacks and ransomware attacks right across the board, from small businesses to large businesses to public sector. And so we are really trying to encourage everybody to get security smart now for the longer term. So how do we build that trust in from the start? We've heard a lot already around consumer trust, but that can be erased quickly and overnight if we don't put the right security measures in. So putting in the right VPN secure networks for public and private networks, making sure the data is backed up and protected. One of the other trends that's coming out is we are seeing kind of new ways of working, obviously greater levels of collaboration and creativity being fostered. We heard it on the video from the World Economic Forum around flatter hierarchies. I think this move towards virtual working has really flattened the hierarchies, and it has opened up the dialogue for every level of an organization to get involved in conversations. We've seen a shift in communications, where moving away from annual surveys right down to regular surveys now, where they're done every 2 or 3 weeks. And so we're seeing leadership styles completely changing, which is a positive and a welcome change, I think. So I think for many of us really conscious of the time, this has forced a big shift in terms of leadership beliefs, in terms of ways of working. Technology proves to be a foundation to help us move forward in this digital age. But I think it has to be caveated in terms of the right kind of cultural changes alongside that, whether it's the bridge with digital skills and making sure that everybody has access to the technology, and then the right training alongside that as well. So there's a lot to consider. I think we're at the start of this. Certainly we've got an expression that's kind of getting louder in Dell Technologies, which is, we did it fast, but now we need to get it right. And so we're working with lots of our customers and our partners to put in longer term strategies that are going to make it sustainable to drive productivity. So this productivity surge that we've seen, this adaptability and flexibility that's come through over the last couple of months, how do we really sustain this in the longer term? But also, how do we make sure that we don't burn out our employees and our customers at the same time? And I think everybody's got a bit of digital fatigue going on. So how do we balance that out? And I think, more recently we've had World Mental Health Day last Saturday. I think that really is playing up on lots of organisation and leaders' mind around how do we bring a more empathetic play and leadership role to these organisations moving forward. So significant shifts in terms of the future of work. It really has caused and forced us to reimagine internal communication and collaboration. It's fast-tracked decision-making for many of us. It's changed our approach to how we look at risk. But really, we're looking at how do we drive longer-term value creation. And although this is a very dark time, there is a lot for us to be hopeful for. So I'm conscious I'm over time, so handing back to you guys.
Thanks so much, Margarete. And we've got lots of questions coming in from viewers, so I'll put a few of those to you. We've got a couple about employer responsibility if the workforce is working remotely, working from home. To what extent is it the employer's responsibility to make sure that employees have a safe, healthy, efficient environment. And someone adds to that, where do you draw the line? Are employers responsible for covering heating bills and internet bills? And they make the point that companies arguably, didn't cover most travel or commuting. So where is the line there? Where's the employer's responsibility?
Yeah, look, I think it's a brilliant question. It's a really live debate that we're having with lots of big organisations and small ones at the moment around what is that fine line. I think, to be honest, we've moved from just the employers having the responsibility to the employees taking responsibility, and it's a collective, right? Everybody's trying to get through this in the best way. I think there is a line. I think organisations want to make sure that because remote working is here to stay, or some form of hybrid working is here to stay, everybody should be trying to set up in a way that it is sustainable, so that we're not having people work in the bath, as we saw in one of those photos. And that is the real use case. We are seeing people in very difficult situations. So employees and employers have a responsibility to make sure that people are set up for success. And I think that it depends on the organization, depends on the digital maturity and where they are. But I think those employers and business leaders that reach out to employees to really check on them and to make sure they're set up correctly and that they've got what they need within reason are going to be the ones that are going to drive greater levels of trust and sentiment and loyalty in the longer term.
Great. And you alluded a bit to digital fatigue and some of the difficulties that people are experiencing now, remembering that we've only really been in this situation for less than a year. So if it goes on for longer, we may see more of those problems arising. What kind of strategies are you considering for detecting and dealing with remote burnout? How can you tell if people are maybe struggling a bit, and what can you do to help?
Yeah, so I think, again, a very live conversation, even on social media, around the importance of listening, about checking in, about having offline channels. So you're not doing all those open conversations and in Zoom or team settings in front of everybody else. I think this is requiring leaders to be actually more vigilant and to listen more and to be more engaged with potentially their employees than they might have been in the office at times. And so the EQ element of this is so important, Victoria, and it actually makes us all work a bit harder because we've got to check in on them, and we've got to be mindful of ourselves as well, that we don't get that burnout. So I think we're going to see a greater shift in leadership styles, but also just in that kind of connection and communication. So a move away from annual surveys to maybe even every 2 or 3 weeks, checking in on employees. And I think actually we're seeing, for a lot of our customer base and our partners, we're having maybe weekly meetings, and we'll have one meeting that is not about work. It's just about well-being. How are you doing? And a good example is we've a weekly yoga session. There's weekly bake-offs. These are to involve the family. It's to really touch on the human element of the workplace, because you do get on the hamster wheel of going from one call to the next, and you don't actually get a check in and say, how are you today? How are you finding it? And so I think those human techniques and those human forums of whatever they may be in your organization, hold on to them. Maybe it's just an informal coffee morning where you don't talk about work. I would encourage everybody to try and embrace that and set that up and get that going.
Thanks a lot for your insight there, Margarete, and thanks for joining us.